Bond. James Bond. Shaken, not stirred.
Utter one more syllable and I'll have you killed.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
For your eyes only, darling.
I never joke about my word 007.
For England, James?
Come in, Univex. James Bond here.
Am I going to have a problem with you, Bond?
Allow me to introduce myself.
You're that secret agent! That English secret agent from England!
No, you're cleverer than you look.
Still better than looking cleverer than you are.
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
007 reporting for duty.
Hello, the name's Berkeley, Ziggy Berkeley from Cinema on the Rocks. And with me is Eric Dewey from Socially Awkward Studios. And you are listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. Yes, this is the show where we talk about bondage, James Bondage. And in this episode, you are in for a treat. Yes, we are going to be looking at some of the origins of where the James Bond stories come from. And while often this involves me taking Eric to places that can be described as, what the hell did I make him watch now? We went a completely different tack this time.
Indeed, we're looking at some movies that were good. These were good movies we watched this time around. I will say I did like some more than others. I had definite favorites among them, and there was one that we'll talk about that I won't say I didn't like it, but I definitely felt more disconnected to it than the other three films. But we'll get there.
I'm going to place a small bet with myself as to which one that is. We'll see. We're going to be discussing 4 films today, 3 of which are the recipients of the types of superlatives that you normally will not catch me using when discussing general cinema, because I don't like to use the term best for describing movies in general, because the frame of reference is so large, it's just ridiculous. Like, Humphrey Bogart famously said that it was stupid to have a Best Actor award at the Oscars because everybody played a different part, so you couldn't really put them together as apples to apples. He thought that the best way you could find out who the best actor was have everyone read the same scene from Hamlet and see how it went. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's appropriate that I came up with a reference to Humphrey Bogart. Magical, isn't it?
A lot of Bogart in these films we're talking about today.
Yeah, because we are talking Bond Noir. Yes, that's right. We're looking at 4 classics of film noir. Specifically, we're looking at what could really be considered the golden age of noir on film. And that would be the time of U.S. entry into World War II and just slightly after. So 1941 through 1946. The premise behind this, other than just me wanting to find an excuse to make Eric watch these movies, which I've been looking for, is that, as we've mentioned in the past, and this is an example of my whole approach to studying film and why I review movies and why I refuse to put myself in a single niche on my site when I review movies.
That would be cinemaontherocks.com for all of you out there who don't know.
Indeed. Yes. cinemaontherocks.com. Or if you really don't like typing, cinemaotr.com also points you to the same place. But it's that art doesn't exist in a vacuum, and there's influences that, lead up to the next thing. And as we've discussed before, when you look at the character of the Bond villain, that character has very definite antecedents. Specifically, Professor Moriarty in the Sherlock Holmes stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and very specifically, in fact, Ian Fleming admitted as much, Fu Manchu from Sax Rohmer's Fu Manchu stories. And the character Fu Manchu, of course, being the only good thing about Sax Rohmer's Fu Manchu stories. But I refuse to believe that Nayland Smith has anything to do with James Bond, even though he is a Brit that has some kind of spy police powers. He's with Scotland Yard, but we don't think about these things. No, there's something else in between there. And on the same token, yeah, Sherlock Holmes, there's something there, but again, there's something in between. Sherlock Holmes still has his friend who's always with him. Yeah. Sherlock Holmes is certainly not a alcoholic assassin.
Well, not alcoholic specifically, but definitely an addict, but definitely not an assassin, and definitely not a womanizer either.
No. In fact, if it weren't for Irene Adler, some people, have had suspicions. But no. So The place that I find a lot of this evolution happening is in film noir, which to me also happens to be some of the greatest storytelling in the history of cinema. And so we took 4 film noir pictures that I think show this evolution, and you can see the beginnings, or at least the middlings, of the actual archetype for James Bond, and for the femmes fatale and not so fatale, and for the international intrigue, and so on and so forth, as it were. So, without further ado, the first film we're going to be talking about is from 1941. It is actually the 3rd attempt made at making this film, even though most people think that it's the only one out there. I'm referring, of course, to The Maltese Falcon.
Indeed, this was I'll say it, I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. And, of course, I'm not sure, I'm trying to remember back if I ever actually read this book. I feel like I did, but I definitely didn't remember it while watching the film. So I don't know exactly, if it was one of those ones that I just read in a fit of reading a whole bunch of different books and therefore kind of lost this one amongst them, or if I just never read this book.
Well, for Eric and everyone out there, I do encourage you to go read the book. In fact, really should add that to your list after the books that we have covered for future episodes. It is, of course, based on the novel by Dashiell Hammett, and it is a very close follow of the novel. In fact, the famous story goes, this movie was written and directed by John Huston. And if you don't know who that is, just think, you ever watch the animated versions of The Hobbit in the 70s? He's Gandalf. That's who wrote and directed this film. And the story goes that he, or for other people, perhaps his secretary, just took Dashiell Hammett's novel, sat it in front of him, went to a typewriter, and just translated it into a script verbatim, almost. And it is very close. Not 100%, but very, very close. So this is a very faithful adaptation.
Yeah, I think you can kind of see that as you're watching the movie. Sometimes you can tell when a movie has been based on a novel and it's actually, it's not straying too much. Even if you haven't read the novel, you can kind of see the pacing seems more literary than it does film almost. I don't know if I'm making any sense when I'm saying things.
No, it does. Because there are some times where something that makes a really great book doesn't make a really great movie. And if somebody tries to be faithful to it, it just sucks. Or a great filmmaker recognizes that and makes a better movie out of it than filming the book would have been. We see that a lot with Bond, don't we? But,
yes.
But in this case, it's one of those magical stories that plays beautifully both ways. And along with Dashiell Hammett's wonderful story, and something that I think you're going to find in most of the films we're talking about, amazing dialogue. You also have just performances that are just sublime. In fact, I'm going to come out and say this right away. Spoiler alert. I consider this one of, if not the most perfectly cast movie in Hollywood history. So there we go.
Wow. I definitely got the feeling that it was cast very well. It's very, it's being that I actually did end up just almost accidentally, I think, watching these basically in the same order that we're going to be talking about them. So this was the first one I watched of these films, and all of which I had never seen before. And it did strike me that the characters did seem very true to their parts. So whether that's just good acting or good casting or a combination, I really did enjoy it. As a side note, also, this was the very first Humphrey Bogart film I think I've ever actually watched. So I had that going for me, which is nice.
Just see why I had to do this, folks.
Not the first thing I've seen with Peter Lorre in it, though.
No. Because, of course, Peter Lorre was the very first James Bond villain.
La Chiffre.
In the CBS television travesty of
I was going to go with
Royale.
Abomination, but travesty works as well.
Yes.
We didn't include that in the Abominations episode, although it could easily fit in there.
Though, I will say, the best part about that movie was Peter Lorre.
I can concur with that. Not a problem whatsoever.
Now, in The Maltese Falcon, we have we have the wealth spread around here, folks. But before we get too far into it, actually, one thing that I meant to ask before we'd started, you know what my concept was for this. As you were watching these movies, did it click with you? I mean, honest answer.
Yeah, I think so. I did get it, especially with one of the later ones we'll talk about. I definitely, like, it was like, oh, yeah, this dude's James Bond. Before James Bond was James Bond. But this dude is him. In these earlier ones, it wasn't as pronounced, so to speak, but it was definitely there. You did have that smooth-talking hero who is able to do, basically, he's on the right side of things, technically speaking, but not necessarily following all the rules. And I think that's something that James Bond is well known for as well.
Indeed. And of course, in all of the movies that we're going to be talking about that feature this man, the analog for James Bond in this film is played by Humphrey Bogart. Go figure.
The original short stuff. Oh.
The original, well, that is something that even as a Bogart fan, because as is very plainly obvious, I love Noir, and as such, I love Humphrey Bogart. But even as a fan who goes back to these movies, in fact, 3 out of these 4 movies that we're talking about, I watch a minimum of once a year.
Oh, wow.
In fact, 3 out of these 4 movies are on my essential 18 list of movies that if I was stuck on a lifeboat for 2 years and only had 18 movies to watch, that took a long time to come up with, folks. If you want to see the logic behind it, go to my website, cinemaontherocks.com. 3 of these movies are on that list.
I'm curious about the evil villain. I want to know more about this evil villain who says, "That's it, Ziggy. I'm sending you to a deserted island for the rest of your life. But first, I will allow you to pack 18 films and a DVD player and a TV."
I never figured out the villain. However, I said lifeboat, and I'm specifically picturing the lifeboat from Prometheus.
Okay.
So very well apportioned with a bar, a nice bed, but for some reason the entertainment system just only has a very limited memory. And hopefully there is not an alien sitting on the other side of the airlock.
Well, just don't go out the airlock. Simple enough. Problem solved.
There we go. So our analog for James Bond in this film is played by Humphrey Bogart, and that character is Sam Spade. He is a private investigator, and the film takes place in one of the great noir locations in all the world, my beloved San Francisco, California. I have a little sidebar about that. You knew I would.
But
Come on, Eric. You knew I would.
Rice-a-roni. No, not that.
No, not that. However, there is a establishment that is mentioned in the book that doesn't get a mention in the movie, which now houses one of the genuine replica. Well, one of the genuine Maltese
replicas,
Falcon.
Huh? All right.
Well, since there never was an original Maltese Falcon, one of the genuine props
replica
of the Maltese Falcon is now in this establishment. It is a place called John's Grill. It is just off of Union Square, at kind of the border between Union Square and the Tenderloin districts. And it is a grill/jazz bar. And I have been to this establishment. I bought the souvenir glass. And for someone who has been to San Francisco as often as I have, I've only eaten there once. I can't recommend this place. This is one of only 2 bad meals I've ever had in San Francisco, and the music wasn't that great either. Whereas directly across the street from John's Grill is my favorite place to sit in the world, which is Les Joulin Jazz Bistro, which has much better music and much better food. So there we go.
Well, you got jazz and bistro, so pretty much winning.
Yes. And very nice bartender. So there we go. That said, they have no idea I'm talking about them. So hey, if you guys are listening, bonjour!
And if you would like to sponsor the show, hit me up at eric@foureyedradio.com.
Yes, or me at ziggy@cinemaontherocks.com. But so Sam Spade is a private detective with an office in the ferry terminal building, which if you've ever seen a picture of San Francisco touristy like, there's a building that says Port of San Francisco on it. His office is in that building. That's exactly where it is. And he has a partner, Miles Archer. And one day, a woman comes into their office, very femme fatale-ish, and she originally calls herself Miss Wonderly, and she says that this man is causing problems with her sister, and she's oh so worried about her sister. Could they tail this man and try and help her sister out? They don't believe a word she says. But, as the wonderful dialogue notes, they do believe for $200.
Yes, they do.
And since
indeed.
this is 1941, that means something. So Archer agrees to follow the girl. He gets shot and killed on this surveillance detail, and now Sam Spade must figure out what's going on. And we end up finding out that there is a conspiracy amongst thieves to try and acquire the original MacGuffin, the Maltese Falcon, which the completely bogus story at the very beginning of the film, there's an opening crawl that says that the Templar Knights of Malta, which is really kind of funny because those are two different orders, Knights Templar and the Knights of the Hospital of St. John, two totally separate orders. But anyway, they're saying that the story of this is that they wanted to give tribute to the King of Spain for the grant of land, and they thought that, and all he asked for was a falcon every year. But instead of sending him a real falcon the first year, they sent him a jewel-encrusted golden one, which was then stolen immediately.
But of course.
And that is what we are looking for throughout the course of this film. So what we have is, we're chasing down the Solex agitator. See where I went with that? Like that one? And at the same time, we're coming across some nefarious, kind of interesting, slimy characters. Why don't you tell us about some of those, Eric?
Well, we do have the villains, plural, of this film that kind of go along as we meet them. We have, of course, Peter Lorre's character, who is just as slimy as you would imagine a character by Peter Lorre. Because
it's Mr. Joel Cairo.
Joel Cairo in this film, yes. He has this slimy way about him, and that's on purpose. He's supposed to be that way, and it's fantastic. He plays the part very, very well. He's a creepy dude, and it works out. It works out quite well. We also have Sidney Greenstreet as Caspar Gutman. Forget how they pronounced it in the film.
Gutman. In his first major film role. At the age of 62.
He definitely has a Bond villain feel to him, although more of a businessman type than a slimy type. More of the, I'll do just about anything to make a buck, but he also recognizes when there isn't a buck to be made and just kind of, I'm not going to hold a grudge at this point, I'm just going to go. Which I appreciate about him, if you're going to be a villain, don't be a totally douchebag villain, be cool about it. These two especially are definitely creepy and villainous.
Yes, and taking them in reverse order, when you first met Gutman and listened to him talk, and just because we're also very much into alcohol here, I'm sure you've noticed, one of the best lines of this movie is when he starts pouring Sam Spade a drink, and then Sam Spade doesn't say when, and he says, "Good, I don't like it when a man says when, because it means he's not to be trusted if he drinks too much." So I misquoted the line, my apologies, but just that whole idea where he doesn't like it when someone says, "Stop pouring, I've had enough," because that means they have to watch what they're going to say, and they're not to be trusted. So that was cool. But when I saw Gutman, I'm thinking Goldfinger.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I said he had kind of a Bond villain, like a feel to him. He didn't have the over-the-top evil plot going on, but he definitely did have a bit of an evil plot, Yeah,
he basically was out to make money.
Yeah.
And realistically, that's what Goldfinger's doing. That's what Max Zorn is doing. And this is where I think Noir also really speaks to the whole James Bond idea, is in order to get to this point, we have the most convoluted, ridiculous set of circumstances that we have to go through first, and that have been gone through. It's not a straight-up mystery like in a Sherlock Holmes story. It's a different variety of detective. It's a detective who's not just trying to find the answers, but who's getting in on a conspiracy and having to insert himself in as though he is becoming part of the conspiracy.
Yeah. There was one particular thing that really screamed Bondinessocity for me in Humphrey Bogart's character in here, and that was his reaction to the murder of his partner. He was surprisingly indifferent about it, as if, hey, part of the job. Hey, make sure to get his name scraped off of the window. I need to have my name only up there, I guess. Like, seriously? But that's very Bond. Recognizes the risks of the job and is not going to be sentimental about someone losing their life in the line of the work, even though he's not a paid assassin by the government, but he's still in a dangerous line of work, and he recognizes that.
And just to show how he's also Bondy, was screwing his partner's wife, and he's really upset that she's becoming clean.
Yeah, he's like, this was so much easier when you were married. Now you need to kind of, you're no longer my type.
Yeah. And then we also have, and this is another thing that struck me immediately. We have the character of Effie, Miss Moneypenny. Did you see that?
Yeah, I could see that. Kind of. There were some parallels there.
Effie is, of course, the secretary of first Spade and Archer and then just Spade. But it's just the way that they've got this little bit of a flirt going on that doesn't go anywhere and never goes anywhere. But they've still got this small byplay. It's not overt like it is in the Bond films, but there's still something there, and she's very helpful and then gets out of the way, which is very much like the Moneypenny character in the Bond films. So that's something else that struck me is I can see a little bit of a start of an idea here for something like that.
Certainly. Yeah, absolutely.
And then, of course, we have Joel Cairo, whose introductory scene makes me laugh out loud every single time I see it. And again, speaks to some Bondinessocity, even though it plays out differently than it does in the Bond films. Because one thing that always happens to Bond, bad guy gets drop on him. It always happens. It's just part of the formula. First thing, Joel Cairo comes into his office, pulls a gun on him. And Sam Spade plays it cool. Then he disarms him, and then he just has banter with him. That's very Bond-like. And then Joel Cairo gets his gun back, holds him up again, and he just laughs.
Oh, may I have my gun? Oh, sure, here you go. And now I'm going to search the office. Wait, what? Really? And that's what he says, basically. He's like, really? We're still on this?
And they laugh like, I won't stop you.
Just do what you need to do, buddy.
But the humor that goes along with the air of danger and violence, I think, is another thing that you get out of Noir that lends itself to Bond later on, because that's certainly not something you get out of Fu Manchu. There's nothing funny there.
Well,
it's just
not intentionally.
I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, I said not intentionally.
True. I mean, even if you're into racist jokes, there's nothing funny in Fu Manchu. But here and the other thing you have out of Noir that you get that's essential to a Bond film, and if you don't have it, it's not a Bond film, which I think is why the original CBS television version of Casino Royale didn't work. Noir lives and dies on atmosphere. Bond films live and die on atmosphere. They need the atmospherics to keep them together, just like Noir does. And when that's not there, like in the CBS television version of Casino Royale, it falls apart. It just doesn't work. Nothing's going to save it. Peter Lorre is not going to save it. But when you have the atmosphere, the magic happens, and that's Maltese Falcon.
Absolutely. Yeah, the movie was definitely very well done, very well played out. It's a good story to begin with. Very interesting, very intriguing. It keeps you involved in the story. And Humphrey Bogart does a fantastic job playing this gruff yet funny character that you can't help but enjoy.
Indeed. And then, of course, we also have something else that's really missing from the Sherlock Holmes stories, and that doesn't play very well in Fu Manchu. There's a brief hint, fortunately not with Nayland Smith, but anyway, the femme fatale. And here we have Miss Wonderly, soon revealed to be Bridget O'Shaughnessy. And you don't know whether she's coming or going, whether she's good or bad. Kind of like Octopussy. Come on, Eric, say it.
Octopussy?
Yeah, you know. What did you see in Miss Wonderly / Miss O'Shaughnessy?
Yeah, definitely got the hint of that Bond girl-ness, kind of. I wouldn't go full on with it. I think some of the later films we'll talk about, we really got more of what the Bond girl turned into, but you definitely get that hint. She's working, she's trying to work him, but he's seeing through her. So you have that, which is also a common thing in the Bond stories. The girl trying to play Bond, but Bond sees through her and ends up playing her instead. You get kind of that a little bit, and Definitely the start of something there. I think, though, in the other films we talk, I think it gets a little bit stronger connection.
Yeah, and part of that is that, and it's amazing how much sexual tension you get in these movies when, at least for the first of them, they're made during the period of the infamous Hays Code, the morals code that was enforced by the film industry. So you had to really dance around things like sex. And they do a marvelous job here. In fact, the first version of this movie that was made in 1931, there are two major differences in terms of the scenes. And then everything else plays very much similar, except for the exact ending and the fact that everything else about the movie sucks.
Everything's pretty much the same except, there's the sucking factor.
It's actually one of those instances where if you had only seen the 1931 version, it would be like seeing a high school production of a Broadway musical you've never seen that was fairly well done. Then you see the Broadway production and you're like, oh my God.
Oh, I see. That's what they were going for.
But the one in 1931 was made before the Hays Code. So at the very beginning, in this film, you see a woman walk out of Sam Spade's office. And you kind of get a feeling there was some sexual tension in the air, but that's all you get. In the 1931 version, he then has to go back, clean up the office, and fluff the pillows on the couch. And then also in the 1931 version, there is a scene wherein the veracity of Miss O'Shaughnessy is questioned as to whether or not she has stolen something. And in this film, they play around it with wordplay, and finally, word is taken as word, and Spade figures out what's going on. In the 31 version, he makes her strip.
Oh, dang.
Not on camera, in the kitchen, but still, yeah. So the Hays Code has its effect here. So I think the sexual tension you get, it's pretty amazing. Though that also leads to my only problem with the film. And this is something that if you'll see it in some Bond films, I mean, you can't help it after that many. The one thing I don't buy is that Sam Spade ever actually fell in love with her. I don't buy it.
Yeah, you don't get that impression. It doesn't feel right. And we know, at least, well, maybe he couldn't at the time, but we know from these future films that Humphrey Bogart can do that. So it does feel a little bit forced, a little bit, you're like, I don't know if I buy this.
And then there's one more parallel that I just caught in my most recent 2 viewings of this film. And that is that I think there is a Bond film that for a particular scene went straight back to this to make a direct reference. At the very end of the film, we see O'Shaughnessy go into a cage elevator and goes down. Just like Vesper Lind in Casino Royale. Now, granted, to much more dramatic circumstance in Casino Royale, but nonetheless, do you see it?
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
And with a movie with the cachet this one has, I have no problem believing that a writer would do that deliberately, or that a director would. So I'm calling that one. I'm saying that's where this came from.
You're like, yeah, I'm going with that.
But any other thoughts you have of the Maltese Falcon, sir?
No, just like I said, I did find it to be a good film. I'm not a fan of the older films in as much as like you are, for example. But I did quite enjoy this film. I did quite enjoy it a lot. And I'm glad to have seen it. I'm very glad to have seen it. I will watch it again.
You can see the connections too. You can see where all the threads kind of hang out. And maybe Bond isn't just created from a vacuum. Now we move on to a film from the following year. This is the only one of the 4 films we're discussing that was not based on a novel. This one was actually based on a stage play. And this film, not only was it based on a stage play instead of a novel, but the screenplay wasn't finished when they started the movie. Casting was a disaster in terms of, from the very beginning, people who they wanted to attach to the movie decided they didn't want to make it. It wasn't going to be an important film, this, that, the next thing. It wasn't going to work, and there were not high expectations for the movie that would turn out to be, from 1942, Casablanca.
Now, this here is a movie that I had never seen, and because I had actively avoided watching it, it's one of those movies that everybody tells you is one of the greatest movies ever made. You have to watch this film. And of course, being the stubborn jerk that I am, when so many people tell me that, I'm like, well, fine, I'm not going to watch it then. And I have actively avoided watching this film for many, many years. It has come up many times. People have been like, oh, have that's just like in Casablanca. I'm like, I've never seen it. No, I'm not going to watch it either. Well, you succeeded in breaking down my wall and making me watch it. And, it works. It was worth it. It was definitely well worth it. It's a good movie. It's a really good movie. I'm like, oh man, I denied myself this for so many years because I thought I could never live up to the hype. But no, this is a very good, well written, well acted, well put together film that tells a good story and tells it in an entertaining way. It's just absolutely fantastic. It's a great film.
I feel so wonderful hearing you say that.
And I'll even say this on top of that. this wasn't even my favorite of the four.
Interesting. Very interesting. Now, with that said, I will, what you just heard there, folks, and no, as always, we didn't talk about this beforehand, but what you just heard there is why I review movies, why I put my opinions out there. It's specifically because I want to turn that light on for somebody. I love it when I can turn somebody on to something or make them consider something they weren't thinking before. It's another reason I love doing this podcast. But that makes me feel great, especially about this film because, and I'll admit, it is very close with another film on this list. But if you get me drunk enough to where I'm going to start using those superlatives and throwing them around, I look at Casablanca as the single greatest movie of the black and white era. That's a hard one to beat.
All right. Wow. Well, yeah, it definitely very good. What I loved about this is you did have some of the humor. Just especially I'm just a poor corrupt government official.
Did you see Renee Mathis in him?
Yes, absolutely. That's what I loved about it. I was like, yes, this guy is just like the. It's amazing what some Photoshop will do. Basically that kind of thing going on.
The character we're talking about, by the way, is the Constable of Police who is played by Claude Rains. Yes. Wonderful, wonderful performance.
He's Renaud?
Yes, Renaud.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic character. He has I think the funniest lines in the film. I mean, obviously playing with Bogart's character, but definitely the straight humor. I think he's got the best lines in the film.
I am shocked to find that there's gambling in an establishment. Sure, you're winning, so thank you very much.
Fantastic, and he's got that in the correlations to Mathis, you still get that not only in the humor and the slight corruptness but not evil vibe, but also in the way he helps where he can without overstepping what he's able to do. You can tell he's a career guy. He wants to continue doing this. He wants to keep this job and keep the level of graft he's got going on. And I think that's very similar to the feeling we get from the Mathis character as well.
And they've also got this, in keeping with their being French, a joie de vivre. Just, they are amused by everything in life. There's just nothing that's going to keep them down. Nazis show up? Oh, okay. We'll have a party. A Nazi party. Of course.
I did not see that coming.
And the reason we're joking about Nazis, folks, because, of course, we're not that way. Casablanca takes place specifically beginning on December 2nd, 1941. So the United States is not in World War II yet. And the reason that you get the date, did you catch it?
No. What are you pointing at?
When Bogart signs a check, the date on the ledger is December 2nd, 1941.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So what we have is December 2nd, 1941, and at this point in time, the Nazis have overrun France, and the portions of France that are unoccupied by the Nazis are run by the Vichy regime, which is basically a semi-puppet regime, looked upon, of course, by all the resistance members and so on as traitorous. But this includes not only the portions of France proper that are unoccupied, but also the French colonies in Africa that are unoccupied, like, say, Morocco, where, of course, Casablanca is located. And so what we have here is a story where you have people fleeing Nazi occupation all across Europe, and they're looking for a way out to get away. And one of the stops that they can get to is Casablanca. What they're hoping for is to get on a plane to Lisbon, Portugal, from which then they can fly to the United States. However, getting an exit visa for Morocco is very hard, especially if you are not a young, attractive woman willing to sleep with the commissioner of police. And in the midst of all of this, running Rick's Café L'Américain. Do you catch that?
Oh, yeah.
See why I was grinning when that happened? L'Américain in Tangier, in Morocco. Get it? Yes. Running Rick's Café American is Rick, our analog for James Bond, played by Humphrey Bogart. And in this case, we've taken another step. He's not a private investigator, but he's also not just a bartender. No, he's Quark. No, just kidding. Even though you can see Quark's bar in this place, too, really.
Definitely, yeah.
If you're a Star Trek fan.
Yeah.
But what we do know is he can't go back to the United States because of some kind of trouble. And he too fled the Nazis. He was a mercenary. A mercenary, man.
But of course.
So he does have something of that background, kind of similar to Bond. Because remember, Bond was a World War II operative. And by operative, I don't mean necessarily a spy right away. He was an officer in the Royal Navy and then became a spy. So we've got that military background. And Rick used to be a soldier for lost causes, but then now he's in Casablanca doing his thing. But events conspire because somebody who has escaped from a concentration camp and who is very much wanted by the Nazis is coming through Casablanca, and the government does not want to give him a visa. And there are Nazis who show up to make sure he doesn't get one, despite the fact that, oh, look, it's Peter Lorre again, being slimy and Italian. Because, of course, Italians, being the enemies in World War II, have to look slimy. That's why Ugardi is Italian. That's why the pickpocket is Italian. There's a reason for this.
Mm-hmm.
And he steals the MacGuffin for this movie. For those of you who don't know what a MacGuffin is, look it up. The MacGuffin are 2 letters of transit. Letters of transit are basically better than a visa. They're signed by General de Gaulle himself. Cannot be questioned. You have these letters of transit, you can go wherever you want, including the plane to Lisbon and America. Now, there's no such thing as a letter of transit, and why a Nazi-friendly government would actually give a crap about de Gaulle, I don't know. But anyway.
I'll tell you why they give a crap. I'll tell you exactly why they care.
Fiber?
Because they saw Ingrid Bergman.
Which leads to one of...
And they said, we're going to make up an entire thing to do whatever she wants.
There you go. And of course, that leads to one of the greatest lines in cinema history. Of all the gin joints and all the towns and all the world, she had to walk into mine. Just awesome. And very, very Bond-worthy. Now, in that particular scene, did you catch another analog?
Well, other than him drinking alone?
Specifically, him getting stone drunk about his former lover, just like Bond in Quantum of Solace. Again, I think the scene... Not a direct lift, but I think there's shades there. And I'm calling it.
I'll accept that. Definitely some correlation there, or at least similarity, if nothing else.
And, of course, what we do find is that our Bond girl, played by Ingrid Bergman,
who is fine. Oh my goodness, she is amazingly gorgeous. Just a stunning beauty.
So now you see what I meant when I pointed her out in Murder on the Orient Express?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Amazing, huh?
She's a beautiful woman. Just absolutely. And you see her, like, the first scene with her, and you're like, oh, yeah, she's very pretty. Yeah. And then she's continuously on the film. And as the film goes on, you're just like, goodness gracious, it should be illegal to be that hot. And it's just absolutely insane.
And something else to play on a line that I often hear you say that I think is busted in this movie. You never wanted to stop her talking, did you?
No, she's definitely not one of those types.
But she walks in to his gin joint, and it turns out that traveling with her is the very person who the Nazis really, really would like to have rot and die in Casablanca. And they would like some letters of transit.
Indeed.
So now we've evolved from just going after a MacGuffin and having a heavily convoluted story to going after a MacGuffin with a heavily convoluted story and international intrigue and one could dare say sabotage and assassination.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some other things that you've been picking up? I've been yapping for quite a while, so I know I'm monopolizing here. I apologize for that.
No, not a problem at all. I would cut in if I needed to. Yeah, it definitely. This is where I really started to see the Bond girl aspect of it, because you do see, even though she comes in with this other guy, and yet he still ends up getting her. It's pretty obvious. Again, like you said, with the times, you don't see it like we see it now, but it's heavily implied that they get it on. It's very obvious.
It's definite that they did in the past.
Yes, yeah, that's not even in question. But it's definite that while she is even supposed to be with this other guy, they do it. And then you get this altruistic streak that you seldom see in Bond, but you do see it.
And it's always because of
the dame. It's always it always comes down to that. And yeah, so you do get those parallels. You definitely I would definitely go out on, I would say that for me, she definitely epitomizes a Bond girl much more so than anyone in the previous film that we talked about, the Maltese Falcon.
I would absolutely agree with you. I totally agree with that. And specifically, she is the good Bond girl. Because we do have also the passing by bad Bond girls. Now, they don't necessarily have to do with, say, Rick, even though we do have one that has been through Rick and has been through the Commissioner of Police and somebody else too, which is also something we tend to see in Bond movies.
Around.
Yes. And of course, we not only have the womanizer, but the alcoholic. So, what is your nationality? I'm a drunkard. And that makes Rick a citizen of the world.
Indeed. You definitely some serious Bondinessocity going on with Humphrey Bogart's character in this film. Especially the earlier Bond that we see. I would say he's most analogous to the Connery Bond. More so than Fleming's Bond or any of the Bonds after Connery.
Really?
That's where I would go with it. I mean, other than I think he's a bit darker, and I don't mean complexion. I'm talking about, actual... I think the storyline is a bit deeper than we see out of a lot of the Connery flicks. But yeah, I don't think that Fleming's Bond had the same humor that he's got. I think that's more closer to what Connery had. Who would you put him closer to?
Daniel Craig, no questions asked.
I definitely can see that, especially, like I said, with the darkness and the seriousness. But I still think there was more humor in Bogart in Casablanca than we see usually out of Craig.
Fair enough.
Although I will say, Spectre maybe being the exception, because we did see him get to let loose a little bit more in Spectre than in the previous films. But but I would say it would be close. If I could say put a mesh of them together, it's Connery.
All right. I like that. I like that a lot. Another thing that I see in the character of Rick that I think is an interesting parallel to Bond, not in the fact that he's this incredibly small, slim dude, and this is something that I think I started to say before and then stopped saying. Every time I see him, I forget how tiny Humphrey Bogart is.
He really is a very small fellow. I was reading it because I was looking at him. I'm like, in this scene, he seems really short, but then in this scene, he seems quite a bit taller than these other characters. Are these other guys just really that short? And I looked it up, and no, he was wearing some serious lifts in many of those scenes, but not all of them. So there are scenes where he's quite obviously smaller than in other scenes. It's disconcerting sometimes.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where you let it go, you enjoy it. But one thing that his appearance, look at how he's dressed. He is dressed like James Bond.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's always suave and smooth, and probably one of the best dressed people in the room, if not the best dressed person in the room.
And speaking of the room, we're moving away from just the smoky, fog-filled exteriors that Noir starts with, and now we got a gambling den. So we have not a baccarat table, but a roulette table. Works. So we've got that going for us. And I know you could say, well, yeah, it's a casino. A casino is a logical occasion. But specifically the way the casino is presented here, I can't help but feel there's just a slightly different lilt to it that I get the same thing when I see a casino in a Bond movie. Do you think I'm reaching there, or did you catch that?
No, absolutely. It definitely had that. Yeah, I could definitely see that correlation. In fact, it felt to me quite a bit like which film specifically, when they first showed the casino, it really felt a lot like Which one? Oh man, one of the movies immediately sprung to mind when they walked into the casino. I want to say Thunderball, but that doesn't sound right, even to myself when I'm thinking about it. But it definitely had, like, there was one shot that I almost immediately thought, oh hey, they've used that shot in a Bond film, and it immediately jumped to me. It might have even been Dr. No.
That's actually the one that I thought of.
Yeah, that's
Dr. No.
That might be, because I'm sure it was a Connery one that I was thinking of. But yeah, I was looking at him like that shot is almost exactly the same as something I've seen, even though this was done before. So credit where credit's due.
But and along with that, you've got the major intrigue of an overarching evil organization where we have one central villain, but representative of an evil organization. So instead of just going after the one criminal who's trying to steal the Falcon, we have Major Strasse, who is our, I would say, closest equivalent to Largo in this movie, I think. Instead of Spectre or Smersh, the Nazis, the most effective villains in the history of the world in terms of if you really want to hate somebody, pick the Nazis.
Listen, we want a bad guy. We want them to be hated immediately before we even introduce anything else about them. We don't have time for them to kick a puppy. We don't have time for them to kill anybody. We don't have time for them to steal something from a baby. How can we make everybody hate them instantly? Make them Nazi. Oh, okay, there we go. We're good. It's pretty much an instant, oh, they're a bad guy. It's, name a movie that's not Schindler's List where the Nazi wasn't the bad guy.
Cricket.
Exactly.
But with that said...
And even in Schindler's List, there were a lot of bad guys that were Nazis.
Yes.
You just had the one that was doing some good.
But even at that, what I liked here, and as I mentioned earlier, anyone who was portrayed as a character from an Axis power, with the exception of, well, no, actually there's no exception there because Russia was never really an Axis power. They just signed a treaty with the Nazis, but they weren't really an Axis power, and they were our friends by then, so never mind. Sasha the bartender, who wants to be Bond but just isn't. But what I like is everyone who plays a character from an Axis power is slimy, but they're not dehumanized. Ugarte, played by Peter Lorre, absolutely slimy, no morals whatsoever, and yet he's a likable slimeball. And the pickpocket, even slimier. No redeeming qualities whatsoever, except he's kind of charming. You can deal with him. And Major Strasse, a Nazi, but he is an urbane Nazi. He's someone who Rick can have a conversation with, like a Bond villain. So he's not dehumanized to the point where he becomes a caricature. He is, in fact, a character. And very interesting note to point out about Major Strasse in particular, and many of the characters in this film. The scene where you have the Nazis singing a Nazi party song when they get drunk. And then Victor Laszlo, who is, of course, the person on the run from the Nazis, who is safe while he's in the cafe, but the Nazis want him dead.
Yeah, somehow this cafe is like this little vortex of nothing bad can happen there. Until, of course, after this song.
Yeah. But... of course, he goes up to the big band and says, play La Marseillaise, which is, of course, the French national anthem, the free French national anthem.
Oh, snap.
And then they get into a bout and La Marseillaise wins. Now, the thing, did you notice how emotionally charged that scene looked? The looks on everybody's faces?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I felt it. Even though I'm neither French nor Nazi, I still felt the emotion in that room. It was fantastic filmmaking. When you can make someone who is completely removed from the situation as far as we are. I mean, I could totally understand somebody living in that time being emotionally involved in that scene. But for me, who, I wasn't even a twinkle in my daddy's eye until 30 years later, more than 30 years later, it was powerful. That was a powerful scene, even now.
And a lot of that power comes from many of the actors and actresses in that scene were Jews who had fled Europe and gone to Hollywood to avoid Nazi persecution, including the actor playing Major Strasse, Conrad Veidt.
That's got to be rough. He's like, okay, I came here. I'm going to be an actor. All right, sweet. I got a part. What is this? Holy crap, I'm a Nazi. I can just imagine, I need the work. Okay,
see, I don't see it that way at all. I see it as him taking an opportunity to show them for the monsters they are. Because at this point, even though it was in the back pages of some newspapers, there was a lot of sweeping under the rug of what was happening with the Jews in Europe. Yet Hollywood, because it was made up of so many European Jews.
They're like, no, guys, seriously, let me tell you what's really going down.
Yeah, and in fact, that is actually why, because originally at the beginning of cinema, a lot of it was centered in Germany. Then the Jews left. I mean, it's not entirely that, but there is a lot of that there. And you notice the heads of so many of the Hollywood studios. That's not because of some racial conspiracy. It's because a lot of them had to leave where they were from. So that's what happens when you have a racist society. People go elsewhere and do really good things like this.
Damn straight.
But that's where a lot of the emotion on the actors' faces. When you see the actors crying, most of them are really crying because this means that much to them.
You definitely get that sense. I was willing to chalk it up to good acting, but I can also see that that would be a good reason why it would be something even more powerful. But yeah, that scene is, like I said, it's impactful, even if you haven't lived through that, even if you're not involved with either side specifically of this particular scene. It's still very, very, very powerful. It's a great scene.
Indeed. And along with just this hodgepodge of people escaping, you also have the opportunity of something you almost never see in the early 1940s. And that is a completely cosmopolitan cast where you have people who are supposed to be representatives of many, many nations. French, German, Italian, American, British, Czech, and a black man who is treated as the equal of everyone there.
Indeed.
That's just fantastic.
Yeah.
And how about Dooley Wilson as Sam?
Oh,
Seriously.
my goodness. Just absolutely fantastic. I absolutely loved his character. I love the fact that, the rival business owner from, downtown or across town or whatever comes in, and he keeps trying to steal Sam away. And he's like, go ahead and offer him whatever you want to offer him. If he wants to go, he can go. And basically Sam's like, no, man, I'm good.
And speaking of, the owner of the Blue Parrot, which is the bar from across town, played again by Sidney Greenstreet.
Yep.
To me, that's Valentin Zukovsky. Do you see it?
Oh, yeah. I didn't make the connection while I was watching it, immediately, but yeah, okay. Yeah, I could see that.
A rival who nonetheless finds some reason to help anyway, and maybe it's in his best interest too,
yeah.
But
he's not completely altruistic, but he's not just an evil bastard either.
Yeah, so, again, just these little things. It's just, the evolution here is just fantastic. And then it all comes out as this fantastic story with a wild finish, as Rick himself says. And there's a funny story about the wild finish, too. But is there anything else that jumped out at you that you wanted to discuss with Casablanca?
No, not really. Although, like I said, this is one of the better movies I've ever seen. I don't want to throw out the best word just yet. Like I said, it wasn't even my favorite of the four we watched, but it definitely a very, very, very close second of these four, and definitely definitely a movie I will go back and watch again. I almost need to make up time for all the times that I put off watching this movie. I feel like I need to make up for it now because my gosh, it was good, and I feel like I've done myself a disservice by putting off watching it for so long. But
indeed you have, sir. But I no longer can question your judgment because you have seen the light.
I'll take it.
There's one parting, just funny bit of cinema trivia that I want to throw out here. In the final scene, and the last line of the movie was ad-lib, by the way. But in the final scene, as you see Rick and Renault walking forward, and it's dark, you only have the light showing on the pavement and this water that it's reflecting in. And as that scene was being filmed, the director, Michael Curtiz, who is Hungarian, had a very thick accent, told the production assistants that he wanted a poodle. And they're thinking, what the hell? What does he want a dog for? And where are we going to find one? So they looked and they finally came up with a poodle. And they brought the dog in on the leash. And the director looks at them like they're nuts. And he points to the ground and says, a poodle of water.
Oh gosh. Oh, that ain't right.
So that story just cracks me up. But I've got it from many different cinema sources over the course of many years, so I chalk that up as to being a true thing. So, and if it's not, it's still a damn fine story.
That's fantastic. No, that's awesome. Yeah. Like I said, this is definitely a great film. I definitely highly recommend watching it. I mean, obviously, I've heard a lot of the references that have come from this film, of all the gin joints in all the world, she had to walk into mine, here's looking at you, kid, obviously those, you can't avoid that. It's everywhere, but I'd never actually seen the film, and again, I wish I had, because it was just great. It's just fantastic.
I will add one more thing with regard to this movie that is a further step forward that you didn't see. You didn't see at all in the Maltese Falcon. They talked about it, but here you actually see more of it, and that's something that's very important to the James Bond universe, both to the books and to the films. It's something that Ian Fleming and Cubby Broccoli both really wanted to emphasize. And that's the international locations of mystery that people don't necessarily get to in their lives, especially in this era before jet travel, because jets weren't even invented yet. So you have this far-flung location in mysterious Casablanca, and you have Paris that you actually get to see. So you have two different international locations you get to see. And this is something that the Bond films have always prided themselves on, is many different locations. So that's another thing that we're getting to here.
Absolutely, yeah. You definitely get to see that exotic locale, and that's awesome.
Indeed. And that brings us to a close with Casablanca. And that brings us to the least known of the four films that we're going to be discussing this episode. In fact, it almost reached the level of total obscurity for quite a while. Up until a couple of years ago, the only place it really lived was Ted Turner's vault. He would take it out for walks on occasion on Turner Movie Classics, but that was about it. But now you can actually get it as a DVD pressed on demand from Amazon, or you could just watch it on streaming Amazon, whichever you choose. And this one it's based on a novel. It is, I'm going to guess that Eric agrees with me here, the weakest of the three films we're going to talk about, in my estimation. I mean, of the four films. Would you agree with that?
I definitely will agree with that.
It is also definitely the lowest rent of the four films we're discussing. It was just basically one of the, you can tell that it's kind of slapped together, even though it has many international locations. It's all made on the same Hollywood soundstage. They never left California. In fact, they never left the same lot. So, but one of the reasons I really wanted to include this film is, aside from that it is the most blatantly espionage-oriented of them all, it also, in its very title, is referenced in another James Bond movie. And I am, of course, referring to, in the movie Casino Royale, there is a character, a very slimy character, who arranges for things such as assassinations and other nefarious acts of terrorism, named Dimitrios. And his name is a direct lift from The Mask of Dimitrios from 1944, or perhaps from the novel upon which it's based, but in any case, from this character, from this set of stories.
Absolutely.
So there we have it.
So in this one, we are minus Bogey, but we do still have Sidney Greenstreet, and of course, our good slimy friend, Peter Lorre.
Who is playing a hero character for once.
Yeah, he's not the bad guy, not even a henchman. No, he's actually one of our good guys.
Yes, and his name is Cornelius Leiden, just like the cheese.
Okay.
Really? You didn't know that? Yeah, there's cheese. But it's also a place. But anyway, and what Mr. Leiden is he is a detective crime novelist, and he's just on vacation after having done a recent book. He's in between projects. And it turns out that as he's in Istanbul, yes, the great city of espionage, Istanbul, located on a Hollywood soundstage.
But of course.
He runs into a police captain who is very, very much a fan. Actually, I think he's a colonel, but one or the other. Anyway, he's an official. And he regales Leiden with the tale of a body that has just been uncovered that he thinks is really worthy of headlines. And that is a body they've identified as that of Dimitrios Markopoulos, who is wanted for various charges, including theft, espionage, murder, all sorts of dastardly things. And Mr. Leiden is intrigued, and he wants to go see the body. So he goes to see the body. This is very important later on.
Dum dum.
And upon viewing the body in the morgue, just an hour before it is destroyed, by the way, Leiden becomes very curious about Dimitrios and decides that he wants to go back and find out everything he can about him. And so, through various interviews and travels, he learns the story of Dimitrios Markopoulos until we get to the final climax. Dun, dun, dun. Which, of course, will put him together with Sidney Greenstreet, because that's Hollywood casting for you in the 1940s.
It's like these guys were the only actors they had.
Well, there are lots and lots and lots of noir movies out there, but it's just in a certain core, certain people seem to gravitate. At least that's what I've noticed. But so give me some of your impressions about Mask of Dimitrios, and what were some of the things that you saw in this movie that, aside from the name of Dimitrios, that you think might have had me included in our list, considering its very big difference from the other three?
Yeah, it definitely still had that kind of intrigue and the jumping around of the story, and that's actually, I think, what made it one of the harder ones for me to follow. It was definitely my least favorite of the four. You got me saying three now. I didn't hate it. I did think it was a good film. I did enjoy it. It's not one that I'll probably go back and watch again, though. It's probably one that this was probably a one-timer for me. But I did find it a little bit, I almost want to say it was a little bit more segmented. Like, it didn't feel like it was one cohesive storyline. And, that is partly because the whole point of it is the fact that it's multiple stories put together for one larger story, but it did feel a bit disjointed to me. It didn't feel like the flow was quite there compared to some of the other films. But I could definitely tell it did have a bit of Bondinessocity to it in the intrigue. I didn't get a Bond vibe from our major protagonist. Peter Lorre as Cornelius Lydon didn't have that Bond feel to him, for sure. But I could definitely see the style elements that you would compare to the more modern Bond films.
And that's really where I'm at. I honestly think you can't even pretend there's a Bond analog here, I don't think. But for me, what it is here, aside from the character Dimitrios, is specifically the spy vibe, where we now, instead of having some kind of detective story or something like that, where we're actually talking about a spy. That's what this guy does. He steals secrets and he assassinates people. So we actually have not something that's off to the side international intrigue like we had in Casablanca. We actually now have the spy. It's just the spy's bad guy. And our bad guy spy also happens to be a womanizer, which we notice at one point. And the major sequence that really draws me about this movie is the long sequence about how he steals the map of the minefield. Because there he does the whole setup, and we have gambling in various forms, first a card game, and then at the roulette tables. And then we have, hints of seduction. And then, of course, we get, boom, this is our plot. This is the bad thing that we're going to do here. And it's just the way that whole sequence played out, just how blatant the spy game there was. That's what made me want to bring this movie into the fold here, was that sequence.
Yeah, I can definitely feel that. That was a good scene, and it was probably one of the better scenes in the film for me. Like I said, I make it sound like I didn't enjoy this film, but it definitely wasn't my favorite of them amongst them. It was still good, but when we're talking, if I'm comparing just these four, I definitely think it's the bottom of the heap on that one. But still a good film, still a good inclusion in this listing.
To be fair, the deck is really stacked. But another thing that I'm curious about.
Yes.
When we get to the point where we have our final scene and Lydon walks out of the room, could you have walked out of the room and left behind what he left behind? Nothing's stopping you. I'm leaving this vague, by the way, in case someone wants to see, because when we're talking about the Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, or the last movie we'll be talking about, these are hard and fast Hollywood classics. They are part of the pop culture icon status thing where really you don't get your certificate of pop culture iconography in cinema unless you've seen those films. This one's obscure. I expect maybe 3 people out there to have seen this. So I'm trying not to spoil it.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm being cagey here.
Here's how bad it was. I even turned to the dark sources to see if I could find a way to watch this movie, and even that didn't pan out very well for me. So I ended up having to actually have you sent me a copy on DVD that I ended up watching, and it is there's no special features, not even subtitles, nothing. It's just here's the movie on a disc, basically. That's all it comes down to.
And 2 years ago, you couldn't have even gotten that. Like I said, it was only on TCM for a long time. So, but could you have left it behind?
It would be hard. I'm gonna say probably not. But then again, I'm not Bond. I'm not this guy. So I'm weak.
Now with that said, even though the scenes are totally different, a correlation did come to mind as I'm watching that scene. You earned it. You keep it. License to Kill.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yes. All right.
So, but otherwise, the main thing, again, the character name, the espionage, and I just wanted to draw attention to the existence of this film because, again, I don't want to spoil anything, and with this movie, it is so hard to talk about it at all without spoiling it.
I know the one thing I really wanted to talk about was the very ending and how it was left a bit ambiguous, is all I'll say.
Indeed. And when I realized how cagey the discussion of this would probably have to be, because originally this episode was going to stop here. And then I thought about, I think we need to tack on a fourth film. So that's why we have 4. Because I figured, it then occurred to me that as much as I really want to talk about this movie, we're probably going to talk about it for, I'm guessing it's going to end up being 10, 15 minutes total.
Yeah, it seems like it hasn't been too long. But again, we don't want to spoil too much. Like I said, it wasn't my favorite of these 4. But let me tell you, I've seen a lot worse films.
And I think that this does go above that threshold of it's not bad. I do think that on its own merits, it's good. And it's something very different. And I think for a Bond fan, which all of us listening to this show are, of course, that's why you're listening to the show, it's worth checking out. And even if you don't want to go buy it for yourself, you can still get it streaming for a little less money. I think it's worth it, and I just wanted to bring this movie to people's attention. So The Mask of Dimitrios, 1944, starring Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet. Little bits of Bond all over the place, and I think it's worth checking out. But compared to the rest of these movies, it's definitely not a noir giant. There is a reason why this movie is so damn hard to find. And that reason is the rest of the movies are just so much better.
Yeah, which I can definitely concur with that statement. For sure.
Which I think brings us to the last of our 4 films. And to me, this is a great bookend because The Maltese Falcon, to me, is the beginning of the classic era of American noir. Now, there are some great noir films outside of this era, like Fritz Lang's M, for example. But if you want the real canon of noir, it starts in 1941 with The Maltese Falcon. And then you have 1942, Casablanca. And then, originally made in 1945, released only to U.S. Army troops in 1945, released after some reshoots in 1946, based on the novel by Raymond Chandler.
Oh, yeah. The
Big Sleep.
Yes. And this is the one that I felt was the best of the 4. And maybe it's because this one I have read the novel. I'm pretty sure I've read all of Raymond Chandler's stuff, even the one that he only half finished and somebody else finished the other half, and it's quite obvious where he stopped and the other guy picked up. But I've loved the old detective style dramas in the books. I've absorbed a multitude of different ones, including, of course, Raymond Chandler stuff. And so this one, definitely spoke to me on that level. But also, the movie is just so damn good. And as far as Bond correlations, I found this one had more than any of the other ones together. Philip Marlowe in this movie is James Bond. Before James Bond was James Bond, he is. You see him get around. You see him get down with the girl he's just barely met for 2 seconds. It's like, oh, hey, look, you're a girl, and I'm Philip Marlowe, so we're gonna do it. And he's got the quips, he's got the one-liners, he's also got the clever dialogue with the bad guys. It's everything. It's everything. And if anyone was going to be even close to a rival to Ingrid Bergman, it would be Lauren Bacall. So you've got it all. You've got the great male character here. You've got the fantastically beautiful, gorgeous Bond girl it's just, I love this film. This was fantastic. This one was just fantastic.
I have no trouble agreeing with you. In fact, this is why you have to get me drinking a lot first before I say that Casablanca is the best black and white movie, because this one is right next to it. And honestly, I actually looked when I made my last 18 Essential list. which was in September of 2014. My next one will be September of 16. I always do it on the anniversary date of my site, and I do it every 2 years because I'm on a lifeboat for 2 years. Get it?
Oh.
But when I made my last list, I look back and I mention this movie went on social media more than any other movie at all. Any genre, any kind. I talk about The Big Sleep more than anything else. So, yeah, I love this movie. And my superlative that I assigned to this movie with no reservation, don't have to drink at all, the best dialogue in any movie you'll ever see. This dialogue is just freaking amazing. And some of it is Chandler's, some of it is different, because this is not entirely faithful to Chandler's book. It's kind of faithful. It was written with his consultation. And the people who are writing this script, the novelist William Faulkner is one of the screenwriters. Another screenwriter, whom the director did not realize was female until she showed up, is Lee Brackett. What other scripts has she worked on? Well, let's see. 34 years later, she'd do a little something called The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, that rings a bell. I think I've heard of that film, but should probably watch it.
So you've got a lot of talent here. And then Howard Hawks, one of the legendary directors of Hollywood, just does a fantastic job here. And in fact, interesting story about why this movie was shot in 2 different times. And another interesting thing to me is if you weren't told that, would you have been able to tell?
I don't think so. It wouldn't have sprung to mind, no.
Because when this was filmed for release for 1945, Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall were having an affair.
Oh.
Humphrey Bogart was married.
Oh, shame.
Now,
wait, which wife was this, though? Because wasn't he married several times? I want to say 3 or 4.
Yes, this was the second to last one.
It's said when you have to qualify it as second to last, because that means there's at least 4 before you even have to use that qualification, I think.
But this is also the same one who, even though nothing was going on, wouldn't let him talk to Ingrid Bergman very much on the set of Casablanca. So that's why she thought that Bogart hated her. However, when we get to the point of the filming of The Big Sleep, and actually before that, because they actually were in a movie called To Have and To Have Not, Bogart is having an affair with the younger Lauren Bacall. Now, Howard Hawks didn't like that very much. In fact, he and some others in Hollywood tried to introduce her to other men, and didn't work. So then after the filming of The Big Sleep was completed, Bogart and Bacall got married, as they would be until Bogart's death. So Lauren Bacall is his last wife.
Should be noted, and one thing you'll notice throughout all of these films, he smokes a lot. And evidently that was not just on camera. He did die from complications of emphysema, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so don't smoke, folks. It's bad for you. It's real bad.
Cigarettes are bad.
Yeah, cigarettes are bad. I'm okay.
But so something else happened, along with Bogart leaving his wife and marrying Lauren Bacall. Another one of Lauren Bacall's movies came out, and it bombed. And the studio was afraid that they were going to lose out on a big investment because, of course, actors and actresses were studio property at this time. That if this bombed, then she was done and their investment was gone. And so they thought, she was really, really naughty and sultry in To Have and To Have Not. So almost all of the more sultry, edgy dialogue that she says in The Big Sleep, those were reshoots. And what's funny is I think her chemistry with Bogart is better after they're married, contrary to all of the cliches out there that sex and fun and all that stuff are done. No, they got better. So the naughtier stuff was actually reshot after they were married. I find that interesting.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense a little bit, because it did seem that they were very comfortable with each other in some scenes, and in other scenes, not quite so much. Not enough that it was distracting. Not enough that it was like, hey, what's going on here? But looking back, you can kind of take a look. You can kind of see where those differences were.
And the other thing here is you have 2 naughty Bond girls. Actually, you have 3 naughty Bond girls.
Uh-huh.
You have Lauren Bacall is the good naughty Bond girl. And then we have her sister, who is the cause of all this trouble. This trouble being, well, we'll get there, played by Martha Vickers, whom the studio was afraid was going to steal Bacall's thunder, so a lot of her acting ended up on the cutting room floor. She would go on to play sexpot characters in the 50s. But what we have here is Humphrey Bogart as Philip Marlowe, not to be confused with Sam Spade, a private detective who used to work with the police, and he is called into very wealthy man's mansion, Mr. Sternwood. And Mr. Sternwood, who is very unhealthy, barely ever leaves his greenhouse, and that's because he needs it to be very warm. And he lets other people do his drinking for him, so because he can't drink.
Right.
Leads to another one of my favorite alcohol lines. See why I love Noir so much? How do you take your brandy, sir? In a glass. That's just great. I love that. In a glass. It seems like such a simple answer, but that dialogue just... I don't like your manners. Well, I don't like them either. I mourn for them on cold winter evenings. You go too far, Marlowe. That's a hell of a thing to say to a man, especially if he's walking out of your bedroom. These are Bond lines. And Bogart is delivering them like James Bond. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, the dialogue in this movie is absolutely fantastic. Just the back and forth between Philip Marlowe and just about anybody is absolutely brilliant. And that's what made me really... This is the one where I really looked at it and said, hey, that's Bond. That's the way Bond would react with these people. It really makes me look at that in a totally different light as far as like, okay, well, I need to reread these novels. I need to go back and reread Raymond Chandler and see if that same kind of spark is existent there. Like, because I would look back at it and be like, okay, now I know exactly where Ian Fleming got this. Like, this is direct inspiration, I'm sure. In this film, absolutely, you see the back and forth, and not just between him and the bad guys, between him and the girls. We were texting back and forth. We don't, as we say often, we don't discuss these things before we actually record, so the majority of our conversation is fresh and new, and nothing is a retread, but occasionally there are short text exchanges between us about these films, and there was something was said back and forth, and I recall saying, well, he wouldn't want me, I'm wearing glasses, speaking of Bogart. And that was in direct relation to this film, where the woman in the bookstore, he didn't give her a second glance, basically, until she took off her glasses, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, hello there. All of a sudden it's like, oh, you took the glasses off, well, let's get down to business. I was like, damn, he's very glassicist, if that's a thing.
Now, two things. One that reminds me of a horrible ad I remember on TV from when I was a kid, when you'd never see an ad made like this today. It was an ad for contact lenses. It said, men don't make passes at women who wear glasses. I swear that was an ad on television.
Which boggles my mind because, man, I will tell you this, ladies, I'm a fan of women. That's it. That's the end of the statement. It doesn't matter if you're wearing glasses, if you're blonde, brunette, redhead. It doesn't matter. You do you, and the right people will find you.
I'll concur. I will say that the naughty librarian look is a bonus. So, and now the other thing I was going to mention about this particular scene, the setup is that one of the nefarious characters that he's trying to go after poses as a rare book dealer. However, he knows nothing about rare books, which Bogart catches him out at in a scene that is lifted directly from Chandler's novel, where he pretends to be a gay guy. So we do have some of that stereotyping in here, but it plays out really well. Doesn't play out badly at all. And then he goes to the rare bookstore across the street, which this woman played by Dorothy Malone is in charge of. She's only 19. Can you believe that? And again, Lauren Bacall is not much older in this movie. But anyway...
Yeah, Bogart did have a thing for younger women than himself, that's for sure.
And honestly, if there's a mutual thing going on there, I don't care.
As long as both parties are mature enough to handle it. Age doesn't, for me, it only becomes an issue when one party is too young to really understand what's going on. And I don't think there's a set number for that. Yes, the law has to pick a number, and that number they've picked is 18, at least in the majority of the United States. I don't think that all 18-year-olds are mature enough to handle that. And then again, there are some people under 18 who probably can, and that's just the way it is. But as long as both people are mature enough and understand the relationship, I think it's perfectly fine. I'm just passing comment on it.
Yeah, for me, it's the guideline I use for anything of that nature, informed consent. If you cannot understand, either because you're not mature enough, or you have a mental disability, or you're a goat, then you cannot give informed consent. If you are under duress, like somebody's pointing a gun at your head, you cannot give informed consent. However, if you're mature enough to handle things and you're not under any duress, go for it. If everybody agrees to it, no big deal. So, age differences aside here, and you really can't necessarily tell with the way that they look in this movie. What's interesting is in Chandler's novel, there is no sexuality going on there. Howard Hawks noticed that Dorothy Malone just oozed it, basically, in her performance. And so he let it ride. And in what to me is a very daring scene for 1946, then you have the implied, okay, you have the man and the woman, they're having drinks and they're talking to each other, and the shades pulled down, they're closed. I'm Philip Marlowe and we're going to do it. So here we have the naughty Bond liaison, just the one-off. You gave me the information I wanted. I'll give and take a little bit here and there. And when I walk out this door, you know I'm never coming back. And we're all good with this. So I think I agree. This is a super Bond moment. And it's one that is strictly to the film.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like I said, I really, really, really enjoyed this film. I just everything about it. I mean, I love the storyline, of course. I love the hard-boiled detective type of thing. I've always been I mean, listen, when I was a kid, I went down to the local thrift store. We had a St. Vincent de Paul store in my town, and I went down to the thrift store and I bought myself a trench coat that I did not need because I wanted to wear a trench coat. It was the middle of summer. No, I didn't care. I wanted to wear a trench coat and a fedora. I had a maple syrup bottle that I had emptied out, rinsed out, cleaned out very well, and put iced tea in so that I could have me a flask of whiskey. I mean, I loved this stuff, and I still do. So it is absolutely fantastic. This movie, I don't know how this movie escaped my attention, honestly. I'm not quite sure how I never watched this. Like, this is not one like Casablanca where I specifically avoided it because everybody was telling me it was good. This is just one that I hadn't seen, and I don't know why. I can't possibly begin to tell you why, but I'm going to make up for it. I'm going to watch this a few more times, for sure.
And again, you have a very convoluted plot. It's not international. It's not spy now. Now we just figure out why things happen the way they happen. At first, it's that the young daughter, played by Martha Vickers, is the bad Bond girl who gets herself into trouble. She's a drug addict, and she has lots of sex with lots of men, possibly with other people. We don't know. And so we're trying to keep her out of trouble. And then there's a murder, and someone's responsible, to quote Plan 9 from Outer Space. And so we have Philip Marlowe trying to put all these pieces together, and nobody wants him to totally figure it out. And it plays very much like a spy game. So even though we're not talking about a spy story, we're talking about straight up whodunit, you still have something that doesn't feel straight up at all. Very convoluted. We go all over the place to get somewhere. And in fact, it's so convoluted, and I'm not giving away anything here. There is a chauffeur in this movie who dies, who is killed. And as Faulkner and Brackett and their other writing partner are writing the script, they can't quite figure out who killed him. So they called up Raymond Chandler. And they said, Mr. Chandler, who killed this person? He said, it's in the book. And they said, no, it's not. And Chandler looked. He's like, you know what? I have no idea.
He's like, yeah, never mind. That's hilarious. He's like, yeah, I wrote a mystery even I can't solve. Beat that.
So you kind of figure it out, but it's just like, it's that convoluted. And yet, and Howard Hawks thought this himself, he said he didn't think it mattered how convoluted it got. And I think this also speaks to Cubby Broccoli's directorial philosophy. It doesn't matter how convoluted it gets, as long as it's entertaining. If the audience is having a good time, they don't care. You can jump sharks. You can feed people to sharks. Whatever you want to do with sharks, you can do, except that because sharks can't give informed consent.
Wait, how old is the shark? Oh, wait, we're not talking about age. I forgot.
And that, I think, speaks to the Bond movie philosophy. And that's something that really, along with the dialogue, along with the super coolness of Philip Marlowe, and our total femmes fatale, and the play in the game, and getting it, and turning away BB Doll when she says, let's go for it. You notice that?
Yeah, like I said, when I was watching this film, it was just screaming Bondinessocity to me. And I was like, this is it. This is where Bond was born. Before Bond was Bond, Bogart was Bond as Philip Marlowe. I mean, this guy, he's, like I said, he's got the quips. He's got the one-liners. He's got the banter back and forth between him and the girls, and between him and the bad guys, and between him and the other characters who are supposed to be, the other lawmen, quote unquote, that aren't necessarily on the side of wrong, but not really on his side either, because he's kind of a lone wolf, a little maverick on the outside of things. And that's how Bond quite often ends up. I mean, how many times have we seen Bond lose his license or something to that effect, where he's not necessarily on this side or on that side. He's in the middle doing his own thing, and that's
every
this.
Daniel Craig movie.
and that's this. This is definitely, I still see Bogart as kind of a meld between Connery and Craig. It's got more of the humor of Connery, but definitely the seriousness of Craig. So, I'm coining it now. Connereg, make that a hashtag, post it on the Facebook page. We're going to make that a thing. Hashtag Connereg.
All right. Connery. It does sound better than Craigery, too. Craigery sounds like something that you send someone to jail for. So,
well, what are you in for? I killed a man. What are you in for? Craigery. Oh,
pervert.
You're not going to do well in jail. You're not going to do well at all.
Actually, come to think of it, if I were going to recast the Dorothy Malone role in modern times, I might consider going with Daniel Craig's wife, Rachel Weisz.
Oh, that is nice.
I am a librarian.
She's a good-looking woman. I'm not going to lie. Had a crush on her since The Mummy.
And if you ever wondered what happened to Dorothy Malone, you didn't, but I'm telling you anyway.
I was just thinking, whatever happened to Dorothy Malone?
She did end up having a small role in a modern noir film. See, I think once you get out of the black and white era, you can still have noir and still have it be good, but it becomes fewer and far between when you see that. You see it in Blade Runner. And then if you want to go to classic style noir, Chinatown, fantastic noir film. Dorothy Malone had herself a cameo, an extended cameo, in another piece of modern noir that went where the Hays Code would never have let one of these movies ever go. Basic Instinct.
Oh, another film that I've never actually seen all the way through.
You've just seen those parts?
I've seen the scene. The beaver shot, so to speak. But that was really the only scene I'd seen until very recently, when my wife happened to be watching it it was on Netflix, and she happened to be watching it for something had led her down that path. She had watched something else with somebody, and it had kind of like jumped around to the point where she's like, oh, okay, well, I'll watch this now.
I'm looking at the microphone over my glasses now. I just hope you know that.
It was one of those things that, and it was, she was halfway through when I came home from work. I came in and I'm like, what's this? It's like Basic Instinct. I'm like, oh, okay. And I watched a bit of it, and while I was, probably reading a book or Facebooking or something, and just like,
what the hell is wrong with you?
This is not good. It didn't suck me in. Maybe I need to watch it from the beginning. But now I'll be honest also, Michael Douglas just doesn't really do it for me. Like, he really...
I'm not saying he does it for me either.
I'm not saying in that way. I mean, but as an actor, like, I can't really, off the top of my head, think of any movies he's been in that I thought were awesome. There's been a few that I can
dispute that.
Well, recent exceptions excluded. Very recent exceptions excluded.
You knew where I was going, didn't you?
I'm talking about, prime Michael Douglas stuff. I'm talking about like what was he in?
Wall Street.
That one I've never seen, to be fair. I'm trying to think now I'm trying to think of the author's name. Grisham, I think. Yeah. What was that? Disclosure.
That was not a good movie.
It really wasn't. And then there was that movie where he was the president. That was not good.
It's called The American President.
There you go. See? What was that other movie? There was a movie that I kind of enjoyed, but I didn't really like him in much, was A Perfect Murder.
Which is a remake of Dial M for Murder, by the way.
There you go.
One of Alfred Hitchcock's great movies.
Yeah.
Does not compare.
Decent movie, but I didn't like him in it that much. Fatal Attraction, I hated. Couldn't stand it. Thought it was awful. Just me. Maybe people love it. That's fine. Go for it. Love it. All you want, but I couldn't get into it. Yeah, there's just, with the exception of Ant-Man, there aren't any Michael Douglas. And to be fair, and I will say, because I'm not going to say, I don't think that that's a Michael Douglas driven film. Yes, he's in it, but I don't think it's his film. I can't think of any Michael Douglas driven films that I really, really love. I'm not saying he's a bad actor. He's not. I'm not like, oh, hey, this guy, I'm not going to watch this. But he's never really grabbed me, and so therefore, and the same can be said for Sharon Stone. I'm not a huge fan. Never really dug into her work that much. I know that makes me a bad nerd probably, but yeah, it is what it is.
To each their own. I mean, you've seen the light on Casablanca.
You'll take your victories where you can get them, right? All right.
You have finally watched The Big Sleep. Got you into Maltese Falcon. I think I can claim this episode as a victory.
All right. No, I am very glad to have watched all 4 of these films. Even The Mask of Dimitrios, which, like I said, wasn't my favorite of these 4, I'm still glad to have seen it. Definitely not, we're not talking Laser Mission here, okay? This was a good movie. It just, when compared to the other 3 that we talked about on this particular episode, it doesn't hold a candle to those, but compare this to some other things that you've made me watch, Zardos. I can definitely say that there was no point during the preparation for this episode where I was looking at the screen going, what the ever-living crap is going on here? Previous episodes
Step into my aura.
Previous episodes have had me saying that to the screen.
I consider Zardoz a victory as well, by the way. I know at least one member of our audience agrees. Hi, Ed.
I was trying desperately. Like, I was talking with somebody just the other day about this show and kind of explaining what we do, how we talk about not just the James Bond universe, but also expand out from that and talk about movies that starred actors from the James Bond universe and movies that inspired the James Bond style, things like that. And I was trying to explain Zardoz. And I was like, okay, so here's the thing. Imagine James Bond in a Speedo with like little holy straps, and that's it. And he's very hairy. And then there's this giant stone head, and it spews guns out of its mouth inexplicably.
Don't forget the disparagement of the penis.
For the particular audience I was entertaining, I did leave that part out. But I was trying to explain, and they did make an interesting point, actually, something that I hadn't thought of, and it's the fact that the plot of Zardoz, the basic premise, I should say, not necessarily the plot, but the basic premise, they've also done several Star Trek episodes of the various series that kind of have a similar premise. And I was like, holy crap, you're right. Oh.
As I said at the beginning of the episode, art does not exist in a vacuum, folks.
Oh, man.
Why I do what I do.
Well, for this particular episode, fantastic choices. I'm very glad to have seen all 4 of these, especially since it was my first time watching all 4 of these. My wife was very entertained. She watched Maltese Falcon and Casablanca with me. Casablanca she had seen many times before, but the Maltese Falcon actually was her first time watching it as well. The other 2 I watched on my own, just timing issues. Otherwise, she might have watched them with me.
Well, I guess you'll have to watch Big Sleep with her again.
Right. Yeah, I'd be okay with that because that's a damn good movie. I'll watch that again. I definitely need to go back and reread the novel. I've got such a long reading list right now. It is unbelievable. Obviously, I've got I'm 3/4 of the way through the first book of 3 that I'm reading for another episode of this show. Then I have another Star Wars novel that I had on my list, but before I can do that, I need to reread Stranger in a Strange Land for an online book club I'm in. Which is a fantastic book, by the way. I read it before, and I could probably discuss it with these people with very brief reminders, but I want to go ahead and reread it. And now I've got to go back and reread some Raymond Chandler too. So
might as well throw in some Dashiell Hammett.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, absolutely. My reading card is full, folks. Don't suggest any more books for me to read. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, seriously, if you have suggestions for movies you think we should check out, either for this episode or not for this episode, but for the show or for just in general, if you have suggestions for us, definitely let us know. I mean, it's not guaranteed that we'll have time to check it out, but we'll definitely make a try at least, or let you know if it's something that we've already experienced. We want to hear from you guys, whether it's, hey, we love your show, or hey, we hate your show, you suck, go to hell. I don't care. Let us know. Talk to us. We make ourselves very available, where you can comment on this episode right on the website at hermajestiespod.com or foureyedradio.com. You can tweet us. I'm at Eric J. Dewey on the Twitters and on the Instagrams if you like to take pictures.
Or you can tweet me at CinemaOTR. I'm not on the Instagrams, but I am on the emails. Ziggy at cinemaontherocks.com.
And you can email me, Eric at foureyedradio.com or Eric at hermajestiespod.com if it's easier.
And of course, you can follow at Her Majesty's Pod on Twitter. and find us on the Facebooks at facebook.com/Her Majesty's Pod.
Sense a theme there at all?
Yeah, I kind of do. Just like there was a theme to this episode. And I'm glad that you could also see the Bondinessocity of these, because they're great movies on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But because I expect a lot of our audience has seen at least one or two of these, but I really am curious if
they could be uncultured swine like myself and not have seen any of them yet.
What I'm curious is, I'd also like to hear if there are people out there who have seen these movies, watch one or two or all of them again and see if you see what we saw with the evolution of Bond and how you can draw him out and draw the ladies out and the plots out of these movies. Because really, that's why I come up with stuff like this, is just to make those connections. I want to see if you see them too. So please let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always a little trepidatious when we do an episode that doesn't focus on anything specifically Bond. Even when we do the episodes where we talk about other films Bond actors have done, it's still, I always wonder if there's those in the audience who are like, hey, shut up and talk about Bond. Hey, you know what? If that's you, seriously, let us know. We want to know what percentage of our audience enjoys when we spread ourselves out like this, or if you'd rather we focus simply on the Bond universe. I mean, good or bad, we want to hear from you. We want to know what you guys think. We're doing this for you guys. I mean, yes, we do it for fun as well. I mean, we have a blast, taking the time to watch these films, in some case again, and talking about them. It's a great blast for us, but ultimately we do this for the audience. We want to hear from you guys. So please let us know, yay or nay. Let us know what you're thinking.
Absolutely. But in the meantime, that's going to do it for this episode, number 57. I have a list of 57. No. Anyway.
I was thinking Heinz 57 varieties.
Which is where that number came from.
Ketchup. Ketchup.
But yes, that'll do it for episode 57 of Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, Bond Noir. We're glad you could join us. I'm Ziggy Berkeley.
And I'm Eric Dewey.
And we'll catch you next time on another episode of Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on The Fern.